Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Calrev's The Chest of the Best. The adventurer's best friend where you can get everything you want for just your top half off. And tonight, we're talking shop. Episode 17 and 18 of the Magnus Protocol. That's right, 2 episodes tonight because I was unable to record due to a short business trip I had to make in the past week. That said, even with a 2 episode recap, there's actually not that much we need to cover, is what I say, but this one took a good long while of like sitting down and going through it. Maybe it just felt like there's more because I was frantically trying to take care of it. But I say there's not too much to cover, but there's still plenty to speculate and ruminate over. So, without wasting too much time, let's get into it. Starting with episode 17, Saved Copy. Episode 17 takes place 10 days after the previous, on April 4th, 2024. It starts with Celia sleepily waking up on the train tracks as a train comes barreling towards her. Thankfully, our mysterious teleporter manages to wake up and dodge out of the way in time, cursing to herself before picking herself up and going about figuring out a way to get back. The audio cuts away from her phone to the break room in the OIAR, where Celia apologizes profusely to Sam for missing their date due to the unforeseen circumstances. Obviously, she doesn't elaborate too much on the details, saying only that an emergency led to her having to take a sudden trip to Oxford. While Sam is a little terse about it, the two do make up and get back to a flirtatious back and forth before heading back to the office to get on with their work night. But not before Celia quietly reassures to herself that she's okay and the situation is okay. Thus, the incident begins. It's dictated by Chester/John, and it's a Magnus Institute statement. Specifically, a statement and research assessment for, quote, candidate PD553, who we later know as Darian. And the statement, it seems, is not from the Institute itself, but from its Oxford Outreach Center, taken on November 30th, 1997, over 27 years ago, and a few years before it eventually burned down. The statement begins by evaluating candidate PD553, marking his viability as a subject, agent, and catalyst as low across all three categories, followed by a recommendation for continued incarceration as part of, quote, the Welling Mutare Materia research program. Excuse my pronunciation, didn't learn Latin when I was younger. The statement begins with the subject talking about the progress he'd been making in court-ordered therapy for his lifelong issues with anger management. He was at his last therapy session, noting the new receptionist he describes as big, soft-looking, and stumbling over every other word, and another weary, bookish-looking patient in the waiting room before being let in. He's meditating under the direction of his therapist when he feels himself getting lost in the flow of the world. I guess just feeling his existence, basically, when an unbearable pain rocks and shocks him out of it. He's suddenly gotten a killer migraine, his body is stiff and aching all over, and he can barely stand. The room has become dark, the doctor missing, and what he can see of the office space as he makes his way out is completely unrecognizable. When he finally clambers up the stairs and out into the sunlight, he sees that he somehow ended up at some shopping center, spying a sign that reads Magnus Institute Outreach Center before passing out from exhaustion. He spends the next week or so in hospital care, having been found completely emaciated, malnourished, and with a mess of other complications with his health. When asked by the hospital how he became the way that he was, he's at a complete loss. Eventually, he becomes healthy enough to eat solid food again and is eventually let out of the hospital. Though with no emergency contacts and his work calls not going through, all they can do is look up his address, put him on a bus, and send him on his way. However, this only furthers his confusion because the bus driver brings Darian to a completely unfamiliar neighborhood leaving him out there when Darien apparently gets temperamental. When he knocks on the door of a nearby residence, a Harcourt house, I believe it was called, he comes face to face with himself. It's another version of himself, less gray in his hair, wearing glasses, and dressed far better, but it's more or less like looking at a twin brother. The two react in the exact same way to each other, startled, bewildered, before giving way to wonder and amusement. They swap stories about each other and come to the conclusion that they must be siblings from the same wretched father. Though they note that the timeline for what their father's been through is perhaps bizarre, with him seemingly attending his own funeral while also being in surgery for the tumor that killed him. The other Darien invites our Darien to stay with him as he recovers from his hospital stay. Over the course of time, Darien slowly recovers, bonding with his brother over their shared struggles with anger in daily life, among other interests and personal histories. Our Darien starts to realize, however, that the only servant in the house, Sharon, seems to look at the pair of them like they're rabid animals, one wrong move away from turning their fury on her. It's a feeling he doesn't like. One night, the two are talking about other Darien's time in university and his hobby of boxing. And it's then that our Darien asks if that's how the other Darien managed his anger. Other Darien then leads him to the reality of his anger management. A secret basement, soundproofed and heavily locked, with a singular prisoner somewhere inside, weakly and raggedly, begging for the mercy of death. Our Darien is horrified even as the other Darien insists that he'll enjoy it and that it's so nice to have someone to share it with. But ours, however, realizes that his hesitation is disappointing his better half. He reacts quickly, pushing other Darien down the steel staircase, horribly mangling him as he tumbles and cracking his skull on the bottom floor. This doesn't kill him, but unwilling to go down into the basement and see what's down there, our Darien elects to leave his other self and the prisoner down in the basement to die of their injuries. He locks the door, takes over his other self's life. He realizes that it was probably Sharon who gave him away to the Institute after she was sent away on a long holiday. All the same, he thinks that realistically speaking, he's basically a better Darien for this world, all things considered. And then, the statement ends. We return to the OAR, where Celia reacts to the incident, thanking the program for giving her the temporal/spatial displacement type incident that she's been on the lookout for, but quietly laments that the incident isn't quite the same, implicitly comparing it to her own mysterious ability. The audio cuts out again before returning later to Alice and Gwen, as Gwen works on Alice's computer. Apparently, Colin still hasn't been around. Celia says she's seen him around, but no one seems to have caught sight of him for weeks. As they're working, Alice offhandedly suggests that if the OAR had an HR department, it would have helped them work out their differences and air out whatever is bothering them. Gwen asks if there was something Alice had to say, which Alice returns to Gwen. Neither admits to having anything to talk about before Alice's computer pops back to life once again. And thus, the episode ends. Filed CAT2RC 1147-30-11-1997-0404-2024. Categorized under Doppelganger, subsection Interdimensional, and cross-referenced with Murder. So, let's start with the biggest eldritch abomination in the room. The Magnus Institute makes another appearance. Not in reference this time, no. We're working with another Institute statement. The second one since episode 9, rolling with it. It gives a plain commonality for the Chester John dictated incidents, but more importantly, it allows a bit more insight into their way of doing things on this world by way of comparison. There are similarities with how the statements begin, with brief evaluations of the topic of research, the dice in episode 9 and candidate Darien here, and a recommendation for what to do with that information. The dice were assessed as having no viability as a subject, low viability as an agent, and medium viability as a catalyst. In contrast, Darien was evaluated as low for all categories. While we still don't know what exactly these categories are for, there's potential for us to hazard a few guesses. Regarding subject viability, this potentially could be a measurement of whether something can be a subject of research and study, or not. The dice were unquestionably dangerous. They were way too random and punishing to be used by staff, hence why its subject viability could be none. Darien, however, is just a person. No signs of being an avatar, just a deeply troubled and latently violent man. Apparently an interdimensional traveler too. And therefore his viability as a research subject is deemed as low. Or at least this is my theory, my working theory for now. As for agent and catalyst viability, the reasoning is still a bit shaky. Agent could potentially refer to whether something is an agent of an entity, i.e. a spooky antique or avatar. But that calls into question why the dice is rated as low when it's definitely got some kind of supernatural inclination. Catalyst could be a measure of how much an item/individual can contribute to cracking the gap in reality. The crack has been demonstrated to best be opened via conflicts between the entity's avatars on the material plane. The blending of fears present in the dice could justify its evaluation of medium, with Darien's interdimensional travel serving as a justification for his evaluation of low rather than none, despite his mundane origins and state. Either way, we'll need more information. I feel that we're pretty close with a hypothesis on subject viability, but agent and catalyst remain a nebulous standard, whose application I'm kind of just grasping at straws to determine. Well, more so than usual. Last consideration. The recommendations for each that the statements begin with. For the dice, the recommended course of action is referral to catalytics for enrichment applicability assessment. Still no idea what that could be, as there's no indication of what the catalytics department of the Institute does. Probably deals with anything that has a good viability as a catalyst, but again, that's just speculation. For Darien, however, rather alarmingly, the recommendation is continued incarceration as part of the Welling Mutaria Materia Research Program. Incarceration. As in imprisonment of a candidate for a program that literally means in Latin mutating material, altering material, changing material. So what? Were they going to pull a Full Metal Alchemist and human transmutate our interdimensional traveler in the name of curiosity, of seeing what would happen? And saying continued incarceration. That would suggest he's been kept prisoner by them for a period of time as of the statement's recording. I mean, it's what is implicitly suggested, though he seems to be rather nonchalant of being imprisoned, considering how Augustus narrates and dictates the statement. But perhaps we can't use that as an indication, though I feel like we can take the nonchalant and blasé way that he speaks to be indicative of the emotional state of Darien at the time. But setting that aside for a second, how does the Institute just have that kind of manpower to keep someone apparently well off and rich enough to comfortably threaten them with legal action? Unless the Institute had some legal backing that allows them to do that. It's possible that the government has that much of a hand in the Institute's work, a suspicion I held very early on, but one that has yet to see much support. Of course, it's still only in the speculation phase, as is a lot of the things that we talk about on this podcast. These are hardly legs to stand on for these theories. And it still leaves the question of why. What was Darien a presumably unwilling candidate for? What does the Mutare Materia program entail, and to what end does it exist? We're seeing more of the inner workings of the Institute outside of the archives, more of its research methods, but they're just pieces of a puzzle which we don't have the whole picture for. We don't have the box for this puzzle, which obviously can be said of the series as a whole. It's just frustrating, because the most familiar element of the series is just as mysterious, if not more, as its counterpart in the original series. In any case, we'll leave the topic of the Institute alone for now, at least until we get another statement. It's also a bit frustrating that the two Magnus Institute statement incidents don't come with notes about who recorded them. Seems like a bit of research oversight in my humble perspective. Just as an academic, I don't understand why they wouldn't label that. Both statements only vaguely refer to the recording individual's actions, the dice being handled carefully, and Darien suggested his statement taker seek therapy. I just wonder if we'll ever get a name for the unseen faces. And I wonder if it'll be a familiar face that we see. Here. Excuse me. That said, let's get into the actual contents of the episode, though. There's not much to be analyzed per se. Archives themes are present, of course. Violence, which indicates a bit of the desolation and slaughter due to targeting of a random individual with other Darien's victim, or victims if he had multiple, and the senselessness of it, making it almost random. Now, regarding my own running hypotheses, there's once again a demonstration of obsession themes, victims of bad circumstances, and emotional numbing leading to depravity. Other Darien's choice letting out his anger on some hapless victim is so out of the box that our Darien is completely horrified when he realizes what his other self does. He's been struggling with it his entire life, his anger issues, that is, and to see that his better self is actually far worse than he could ever bring himself to be, can you imagine meeting another version of yourself that seems to make all the right decisions except for one fundamental one? Anyways, once again, we're seeing these acts of depravity in action. The obsession is present, but perhaps it is only slightly there. An obsession with the anger, with indulging it. Perhaps it is a stretch. But it got me thinking about this episode from the entity angle, and perhaps violence is just violence here. Maybe while the themes are present, this incident exists in a bubble, independent of explicit entity influence, but having the themes that can make their domains feel more real rather than supernatural and primal. Perhaps it's simply an episode to bring attention back to the Institute, to the crack in reality, and to get us to muse yet again over the workings of the web, whose plans in the past revolved around breaking it open. It calls to mind Magnus Archives episode 113, Cracked Foundations. In it, Anya Valette is sucked into the world of archives while cleaning her universe's equivalent of the house on Hilltop Road. In her case, it was revealed that no records of Anya existed in the archives universe. She also didn't wake up starved and near to death. She woke up in the house after being dragged through a crack in the floor. She was bewildered and arrived a few days before she was actually cleaning the house, but she wasn't half dead. Why was Darien? Was his an accident? Was he dragged? His statement doesn't indicate that he was near Hilltop in his world, unless it's named something different there. So does that imply that there are multiple cracks in reality? or that they're not fixed in the same areas across the multiverse? Are institutes across the multiverse researching cracks in reality? The presence of two individuals that match the description of Martin and John in Darian's original universe are certainly eye-opening details, but it doesn't give any indication of their inclusion's meaning and purpose. We'll just have to wait and see. It seems like we're getting more and more of these sorts of conclusions, but that's just the nature of the series, I suppose. In any way, we should probably look at this incident, this statement, as being less in affiliation towards the entities and being more a glimpse into the workings of the Institute itself and, once again, whatever plans may be in the works involving the multiverse, whether in-universe or as the writers intend. As for everything going on in the office, there doesn't appear to be anything particularly outstanding. I mean, well, Celia almost got run over by a train, but she's fine now. This does make it the second observed time, however. The last time was in March 11th, nearly a month ago. It makes one question how often it happens. Is it a monthly thing or completely random? How far does she get warped? Has she ever been warped into a stranger's apartment? And isn't it just the thing that she should warp to Oxford? And then this statement is from the Institute's Oxford Outreach Center. Curiouser and curiouser. However, her reaction to the statement doesn't give us a lot to work with. All she has to say is that it's, quote, not quite the same, end quote. How similar is it to your situation, Celia? I mean, yeah, Darian isn't blipping everywhere, but are you perhaps suggesting that you're also not an interdimensional traveler? I mean, why is Celia like this? It's things like this that make me really have to reconsider whether the whole interdimensional travel thing is at play with her. We know she recognizes Chester's voice enough to be unsettled. Listening back at it, the audio even gets a little glitchy throughout that conversation when she first appears, but the vagueness of her actions leaves it up in the air whether it actually is at play every time we approach it. And I can't help but admire the writers to keep me guessing like this. I can't wait for whatever reveal is coming when it comes to Celia, but I imagine we're a long way away from it. Still, it's something to look forward to. As for everything else, well, it's business as usual. Colin hasn't been seen at all in the office. Celia apparently has claimed to have seen him, but we only know of the one time it happened. And he asked her to not let anyone know he came in there. Well, he asked her to not tell Lena, it seems. Now, he could be making multiple trips, but if that's the case, he's dodging the cameras and everything pretty dang well. I don't imagine he's been offed by Lena via Gwen via externals, because Gwen doesn't seem to react to Colin not being around. She could be that cold, but with how she's been lately, I kinda doubt it. In fact, it's clear that her behavior has caught others' attention, as it seems even Alice is uncharacteristically trying to get Gwen to open up and vent whatever she's got held up inside her. To no avail, unfortunately. Or it could be self-serving on Alice's part, but she is the caring type, however much of a gadfly she may be. Still, I sense that this conversation of opening up will be one of those things that the characters will look back on in episode 100 something or other and think, well, maybe if we had opened up differently, things would have turned out better. But that's just me musing. Anyways, that's episode 17. Lots to consider for the future, things to look out for, and the like, but I feel like it mostly left me wondering, how would I react if I met my other self in the world of Archives of Protocol? I'd hate to imagine that version of me became a monster, but if we were just that similar, I imagine he'd have a pretty good relationship with some of them. Maybe the lonely, maybe the stranger. That's a horrifying thought. The vast also seems possible in my case. More likely, though, he'd probably have been a victim. You know, this is not that fun a train of thought as I thought. Anyways, We're going to move on to episode 18, but before then, we'll take a short break here. I'll leave you guys to maybe consider how you think you'd fare if you met your evil twin, or not so evil twin. Leave a comment if you have an idea. If you're watching this on the VOD right now, you go ahead and leave a comment as well. But I'll see you shortly. For now, we're going to take a quick little break.